This evening, we are very happy to have with us Dr. Sandhya Sriram, who will share with us her journey of revolutionizing the meat and seafood industry and how the industry has shaped her into the person she is today. Dr. Sandhya is a stem cell scientist with over 10 years of working experience with muscle, adipose, and stem cells. She has been featured on Forbes Women in Tech for her entrepreneurial ventures and is the CEO and co-founder of Shiok Meats Pte Ltd, Singapore. I shall now hand over the time to Dr. Sandhya. Doctor, please.
So good evening to everybody, and thanks once again for being here. But today I'm going to talk about food innovation for a sustainable future, and also a bit about myself and how I ended up becoming a food entrepreneur. And as Mervyn mentioned, I run Shiok Meats Pte Ltd, which is a cell-based seafood company. I will talk about the technology and the product as well. But I'm going to talk about my career and my journey from being a stem cell scientist for healthcare to now using stem cells for food. So I have always been a scientist as far as I know, as far as I can remember. Ever since I was young, I always wanted to be in the sciences, in biology, biotech, and so on. But as I kind of went through my career of being a scientist, I realized that I am an entrepreneur, and what excites me is things that I build and how I grow things. And that kind of led on to the journey that I am right now. Like I mentioned, my love for science and research has been from a long time, is currently now, and will be for the rest of my life. I started off as a microbiologist, then went on to biotechnology, and then into stem cell science, and used to always think that I would make the next big drug or a next big vaccine. And that's how we all scientists enter into this field. But after a couple of years, we realized that it's very hard to get a drug or a vaccine into the market. It takes many, many years, more than a decade. And I think I was not so patient, so decided to kind of stop doing research for healthcare, but further use the same knowledge and the skill that I have for using it for food, for sustainable food, and for food for everyone in this world. So I think one question that I've been asked a lot is, why did I choose to do science or research? I think for me, intellectual curiosity was a lot from a very young age. I was always interested in how does it work and how do you make it happen, rather than what it is. It is more like how it's done. Can I do it also at home or in school and so on? And initially, of course, it was impact on healthcare and quality of life. But even now, when I'm working on cell-based seafood, it is still working on quality of life. It's working on nutrition. It's working on making sure people are eating right, people are eating clean and healthy, and food shouldn't be causing diseases, because food is supposed to be something that should treat you and keep you healthy and nutritious. Also with science, there's a lot of creativity and originality that comes, even though it's hypothesis based. At the end of it, you can get very creative with science, and that's exactly what I and my team are doing at Shiok. And also, I like a lot of challenges. I like challenges in the sense that makes me think a lot, makes me read a lot, makes me understand more, talk more to people about it, and come up with good solutions. And for me, honestly, science and everyday life, like, Rosalind Franklin mentioned this many, many years ago. She said that science and everyday life cannot and should not be separated. And that's true. The air we breathe, the skin that we have, the food that we eat, everything is science at the end of the day. It's in and around us. It's in and around the entire life that we have. Everything that we do on a daily basis is somewhere related to science or the other. So quickly, I'm going to run through a bit about my journey, like I mentioned, in science and how it's been. So like I've mentioned, I finished my high school. I was brought up in the Middle East. I'm originally from India. And then I was brought up in the Middle East, where I did my schooling, but then moved back to India to do my undergraduate in microbiology, and then my master's degree in biotech. This was at the University of Madras. And in 2009, early 2009 or end of 2008, I decided that I'm going to move to Singapore for a PhD, and I applied to NTU, which is Nanyang Technological University. And I would say that is one of the best decisions that I made. And I eventually worked on stem cells from different animals, from humans as well, to understand obesity and cancer and how stem cells can be used as a therapeutic and as a therapy. So that was what my PhD was on. And I completed my PhD submitted in about 2012, graduated in 2013 from NTU. And then I went on to become a postdoc, which is kind of the normal journey for a PhD graduate, which either you end up as a postdoc or you work in the industry. And I took the academic route and did my postdoctoral research at NTU for a year before I moved on to A*STAR, which is the Agency for Science, Technology and Research, and worked as a research fellow at the Singapore Bioimaging Consortium. Again, working on stem cells, but different animals, different diseases. So I've worked with stem cells for almost 10 years, 10 plus years currently, and I'm still working on them. But around the time of 2014, I realized, like I mentioned, that, my contribution to science in terms of healthcare and stem cell is going to take a long, long way to get into the market. I was a bit impatient and, I always wanted some sort of a result and something that can be commercialized and that can help the society and people in my lifetime. So I said, okay, let's do this. Let's start a company on the side. So I remember when I was a scientist, all my relatives and friends used to ask me, what are you doing? What are you working on? And I always used to break down the science into simple English and explain to them what I was doing. And that became a hobby and eventually turned into a blog with a couple of my friends. And then we realized that the blog can actually be a business. And we started a company called Biotech in Asia, as you can see here, which is actually a website that talks about science in simple English for everybody to understand. So we did that, and that was my first step into entrepreneurship. Starting a company was new to me, starting a business was new to me. I had no clue about fundraising. I had no clue about finance and budgeting, hiring people and all of that. But we learned along the way as a team. And that eventually kind of led me on to start a second company, which is called Siglo, which is actually an events company. We do mentorship for students and we organize events like skill workshops, talks, seminars, conferences, and so on for science students and science graduates. Also for anybody who's interested in science. So we do fun workshops. We also do very educative skill workshops as well. And that was kind of my second stint into business. And I think, they say once the entrepreneur bug bites you, you can't get out of it. And that is very true. So I ended up starting two companies, but always had a fallback option, which was my daytime job. As an Asian, we are all kind of like scared about starting a startup. And I was one of them as well. I was like, what if the startup doesn't do well? How will I support my family? How am I going to pay my rent? And so on. So I was still working at A*STAR, but I quit being a scientist. And I decided that I want to learn the business of science, finance and budgeting and IP, patents, commercialization. How do you take science out of the lab and actually make it a product? I wanted to learn all of that and quit being a scientist and took up a business role at A*STAR. And I think that gave me the confidence that eventually I can start a full-time company on my own. And that led me on to start Shiok Meats in 2018. This was August 2018. And I can say I'm a full-blown entrepreneur. I only run Shiok Meats, and that's my bread, butter, sleep, air, everything that I breathe. It's 100% of what I do on a daily basis, and I'm loving it. So a little bit on the research that I used to do, like I mentioned, I used to work with really muscular guys, oranges, and burgers. I'm just kidding. I used to work on obesity and muscle wasting. So hence the picture there. I used to work with oxidative radicals and antioxidants like vitamin C. And I used to work on obesity and seeing how patients can recover from obesity by using vitamin C and antioxidants. And that was a lot of the research that I used to do. But moving on, like I mentioned, a little bit of run through my career. A simple idea, a small idea can actually be worth $1 million. And that's kind of where Biotech in Asia started, simplifying research, avoiding sensationalism and putting out the truth so that people know, you might have read in the newspapers cure for cancer, but actually when you read the news, you'll find out that they have, I mean, probably the scientists have found a drug that works in mouse or in a pig or something like that. So that's not a cure for human cancer. So we didn't want to sensationalize news. We wanted to keep it true and explain to people as to why it takes so many years for research to be there. It has to be tried and tested and approved. And we didn't want people to kind of get cheated by the media. So we kept it very real with all our blogs and articles that we put together at Biotech in Asia. And then as part of that, we also started talking a lot about career options in biotech and biomedical sciences. Like I mentioned, when you're a scientist, you always end up either in, as a professor, having your own lab as a postdoc, or you end up in the industry. But in the last 5 to 7 years, things have changed. People have gone into scientific communications, into education, into the government, into regulation and IP and policies and so on. And that kind of led me on to start my second startup, where I wanted to mentor students and talk to them about how they can look at alternative careers, even if they don't want to become a scientist, but they might have a science degree. So that's how SciGlow was started. And that kind of led me on to being on Forbes, talking about how people can think about different careers in their life and what they should, what advice they should give ourselves when they, themselves when they're in college. So this kind of gave me the confidence throughout. I wasn't like this 5 years back. I was a typical scientist, an introvert, always loved being in the lab, never liked speaking much to people. I wasn't a public speaker. I used to present my data and my results and experiments, but I didn't have the confidence to talk to everyone so openly, and so on. So over time, that got improved. And I should say, Ryan Bethencourt, I always dedicate a slide or a page to him, because I think he's been my most influential, push factor, as well as a great mentor advisor. So I met him when I started Biotech in Asia. He is an entrepreneur, a biohacker, investor from the Silicon Valley. And over the years, he started multiple companies, funded multiple companies. I've always kind of brainstormed with him, thinking of ideas to work together on, whether we can do a company together. And I still remember it was July 2018, and I was on a phone call with him, and I said, you know what, I'm going to start a company that is doing sustainable food that can make seafood using stem cells. And he said, yes, go for it, and I'll be your first investor. And that's literally how Shiok Meats was started. So I owe a lot to him in terms of our company, and I'm very thankful that he's our mentor and advisor. And that led to Shiok Meats. So now I'm jumping on kind of the most interesting part of this talk, which is my company. But basically, we wanted to get the world to eat clean, and at least the world's 60% to eat clean, which is Asia Pacific and where we are. So Shiok Meats works on reinventing seafood and clean seafood. So quickly, some numbers, because we have to understand why Shiok Meats was made and what we're going to do with it. So as you can see, the world's population is going to grow from the 7 billion that we are currently to about 10 billion in the next 10 to 20 years, and even more than that in the next 8 years. And honestly, the food that we're eating currently is not the cleanest, not the best, not of the best quality that we used to get before, and definitely not at the quantity that we can feed the 10 billion people in the next 10 to 20 years. So I think the biggest question mark for us is, how are we going to feed the world's population? Are we all going to be malnourished and underfed? Are we not going to have enough nutrition in our diets? Interestingly, there's a worldwide study that's being done, and they release results on and off. WHO talks about it, but they say that even the most developed countries in the world actually have malnutrition. So malnutrition can be of two ways. One is where you're not getting enough food. So those are countries like Africa and parts of India where people are starving literally to death. And then there's another way where malnutrition is, or rather overnutrition is, countries where we are obese, or we have diabetes and so on because of food, because we are eating totally unhealthy food, fried food, oily stuff. And that is not nutritious. It's just increasing our body weights, but we're not getting the nutrition that our body needs. So these are some of the questions that have always been in my mind, and I've always worried about the future for our kids, grandkids, for ourselves, for example, and the rest of the world. So another kind of number that I think some of us would have hardly come across this, but a simple search finds out that the amount of meat, fish, and seafood that we humans consume on a yearly basis. So if you take a country like Hong Kong, they consume about 144 kilograms of meat and seafood per person per year. And Hong Kong has a population of, let's say, 7 million. So just do the math and look at just a small country like Hong Kong, how much of meat and seafood they're consuming. Now let's talk about Singapore. Singapore, on an average, let's say out of the 5 million population, let's say even 50% only consume meat. Just take a random number. We consume about 85 kilograms of meat and seafood per year per person. So even if 3 million of the population consume 84 kilograms per year, you can do the math and see how much of meat and seafood we are consuming. And just multiply that by the 10,000s and the 100,000s for the rest of the world. Honestly, we don't have that much production being done in terms of food, or if there is, because the demand is high, the animals are being, grown and they are being injected with hormones to grow faster, to make the meats bulkier, and so on, which is indirectly not nutritious. It's just a lot that you're eating, but what the protein content and the nutrition content inside is not the same that you would expect, and it's not doing you any good. So over the years, there's been a lot of talks about how unhealthy the meat and seafood industry is. So one thing that they have found out is meat and seafood fraud is very common. Like some of the fish that we eat is not even fish. Recently, we found out that a lot of the the crab cakes or the crab sticks or the lobster rolls that we eat in ready-to-eat dishes actually don't have any lobster and crab in them. They're actually just minced fish meat. So even the name is misleading. So there's misrepresentation. In Europe, they found out there was a huge scandal of horse meat when it was called beef or beef, but it was actual horse meat. There's a huge overuse of antibiotics, fungicides, harmful chemicals. Animals are kept in crowded conditions, completely unethical. They're being abused by humans. They're being injected with hormones to make them look bigger, to get more meats. Completely unsustainable in the sense that we can't keep doing this over and over. Hundreds of years back, when you used to say where your meat comes from, you knew that it was from a cow or a chicken in the backyard. But now we have no clue where our meat comes from. It's factory farmed in some other part of the world. It's packaged in another part of the world. It's processed in a different part and then finally sent to us. We have no clue where the original production was, where it was packaged. We don't even know if the meat that we're eating is actually the meat that it says, and so on. So, farmed and a lot of the wild grown meats actually contain a lot of contaminants. Sea animals are actually having microplastics in them. When they cut open fish, they're actually able to see pieces of plastic, and that's what we are ending up eating. Also, along with animal abuse, there's a lot of human abuse as well. In the seafood industry, especially where shrimps, crabs, and lobsters are supposed to be manually deshelled by slave laborers sitting in horrible workshop conditions, and they're cleaning it up, they're adding color to it because we are not growing them in the best conditions, so they are not the same color, they're not the same texture, so that a lot of chemicals are added to bring that up. So why I talk a lot about seafood is because Shiok Meats works on seafood and some of the issues, and we work on shrimp, crab, and lobster. Before I get into the technology and the products, but we wanted to identify what are the issues with the shrimp industry. So Bloomberg actually broke a huge story a couple of years ago as to how each shrimp was individually injected with gelatin or antibiotics to make them clean. So that is animal cruelty and unethical. Also, you might think that shrimps caught in the oceans are better, they're cleaner, but a lot of the shrimps in the oceans that we catch are unsustainable. There's not enough shrimps left. And a recent study has shown that if we continue to eat seafood the way we are eating right now, in the next 5 years, we're not going to have any seafood in the oceans. It's going to be completely empty. There's no sharks left. There's no shrimps left. There's no crabs and lobsters left. There's no tuna and salmon left. So, and I'm talking about this just 5 years, I'm not talking about 10, 20 years. It's just 5 years. And then my personal experience has been that I visited some of the shrimp farms, the larger ones, the more famous ones in Vietnam and Thailand. And with my own eyes, I've seen shrimps being grown in really dirty water and then cleaned with bleach and antibiotics and then sent off for us to eat. And I've been a vegetarian all my life due to ethical options. But after seeing that, I couldn't imagine why anybody was eating seafood or eating shrimps. But that's because we don't know that it's like that unless you go see it. And I wanted to start throwing light upon it. But at the same time, I'm not a journalist who just talks about the problems. I'm an actual scientist, so I wanted to come up with a solution for that. Also, with how we are growing seafood now in factory farms, we use a lot more energy, water, and land. And this is actually leading to a lot of environmental issues, global warming, carbon footprint, all of that. So my biggest question was, how do we ensure that people are eating clean meat and seafood? And one thing I can definitely say is that our diet is going to change forever. And the way that it's going to change is via alternative proteins. So most of you might have heard about Impossible Meats and Beyond Meats, which are actually plant-based sources. And also in Asia, we have been eating mock meat for a very long time. Hundreds of years we've been eating mock meat. But the problem with plant-based or mock meat is you really can't get the flavor exact to meat. And also the nutrition is definitely not the same. I mean, you can't get the same amount of protein and nutrition that you would get from meat or seafood from something that's a plant-based, unfortunately. There's also insect-based proteins. Nowadays, insects like crickets and ants and soldier flies are being used in flour for like bread, cookies, and so on, and pasta, because it's a high protein source, less intensive, less water, less land, less space use, less energy use for insects. But I think what I'm most passionate about being a stem cell scientist is using stem cells to grow meat and seafood. And we are one of the companies, like a couple of more in the world, that are doing this. And we call ourselves cell-based meat companies or clean meat companies. So like I've mentioned, plant-based meats is there. But we have noticed that meat eaters want meat at the end of the day. We can't convert the entire population to become vegan and vegetarian. It's never going to happen. We just have to accept the fact and be able to produce clean, healthy, nutritious, sustainable, animal cruelty-free, ethical meats and seafood for the population. So we are only a few years away from selling these cell-based meats and actually buying them in the supermarket and in restaurants. And we'll be in stores in 2022. So we're looking forward to that. So coming to Shiok Meats, our mission is to bring delicious and healthy shrimp, crab, lobster, and crayfish meat. So we work on crustaceans by harvesting them from cells instead of animals. We are the world's first cell-based crustacean meat company, and we're the only company in Singapore and Southeast Asia doing this as well. Shiok, as many of you know, means fantastic or delicious in Malay Singapore slang, and hence we wanted to keep it very local, very refreshing, and it's a great icebreaker because a lot of people don't know what Shiok is, how it's pronounced, what the meaning is. So it's a good icebreaker to start off with. The company was started by Kai and myself, the two of us in the middle, and we both are stem cell scientists with over 20 years of combined experience in this field. So we started the company in August 2018, but we have grown to a team of about 14 currently in the last 22 months, so less than 2 years. We have a very good, excellent team of scientists, engineers, and food technologists from all over the globe. And we're actually growing the team further. So we're going to put out job ads soon. So if you're looking for a job and you are in the related field, please do look out for our LinkedIn posts. And with us, starting a business, at the end of the day, we are a for-profit business. And I talk about this very openly. We are not a non-profit business. We are a for-profit business. So the market had to make sense for us. And the Asian shrimp market is $25 billion. So it's a huge market to go after and a great market potential for us. So some numbers again, because we wanted to, make you understand the bigger picture behind cell-based meats and clean meat. But using normal factory farming, we actually use about 1,800 gallons of water to make 1 kg of meat. 1 kg of chicken or beef uses about 1,800 gallons of water. With cell-based meats, we can reduce that to about 300 gallons. So you can see the difference almost 6 times. With the greenhouse gas emissions, from the 16 pounds, we can reduce it to less than 4 pounds. The land use can be reduced about 100 times, from 260 square feet to 2.6 square feet. And currently, yes, our products are expensive. It is more like the organic premium market, but we intend to reduce the pricing to as low as conventional meat, or actually even cheaper than that. And this industry is about 5 years old, but it's been booming, and it's not a fad. It's actually a fact and the need. And we've seen big companies like Tyson Foods, which is the biggest producer of meat in the US, which is the most meat-eating country, actually invested in companies like us and other cell-based meat companies to further our research and commercialize. Big people, big names and famous names like Bill Gates and Richard Branson have actually put the money where their mouth is. They've actually invested in companies that do cell-based meats as well. So it is happening. It's just a couple of years that we have to wait. With regards to our Shiok shrimp, we say that it's health-friendly, animal-friendly, and environment-friendly, because we use no antibiotics, no harmful chemicals, no microplastics, no heavy metals, none of it. We also grow it faster because we don't grow the shell of the entire animal. We only grow the meat inside, which I'll talk to you in a couple of minutes. Sustainable and no cruelty, because we don't kill the animal. And also we have a patent pending technology, which is presented here. So what we do with cell-based meats is that stem cells, which we all have, we have it in our skin, in our eyes, in our liver, heart, muscle, fat, everywhere. So every animal has stem cells, and it's kind of like the birth cell of sorts. So stem cells have this amazing capability of growing and growing in number outside of the animal's body if you put them in the right condition. So we kind of exploited that ability of the stem cells. And what we do is we take out stem cells from a live shrimp, very similar to how you grow plants, fruits, and vegetables in a greenhouse. So you take a small cutting of a plant, a stem or the root or so on, and you put them in a nutrient-rich environment. You control the temperature, the humidity, the soil, the nutrition, everything. And in a couple of weeks or months, what you get is real fruit, real vegetable, real plant. It is not fake, it's not artificial, it's not made from something else. It's genetically, to the DNA level, the same thing. Similarly, we take out stem cells from shrimp and we put them in a nutrient-rich environment. And our factories will look like a brewery, huge stainless steel tanks that you would have seen in the brewery or the chocolate industry or the dairy industry. But instead of chocolate, cheese, or beer, it will be actual meat and seafood inside of these tanks. And in about 4 to 6 weeks in our case, what we get is actual shrimp meat, but without growing the entire animal. So once you deshell and devein the shrimp, what's left behind is the shrimp meat that we eat. And that is made up of 100% muscle tissue. So we grow the muscle tissue using the stem cells, and we get that. And as you can see here, these are some dumplings that we made with the shrimp meat that we grew in our facility. Also, sometimes people ask us, it's too processed, it was grown in the lab. And honestly, at the end of the day, we are eating more processed foods than ever, and that's not going to change because natural foods are hard to get. And it's getting harder with the climate change and global warming. But this is the least processed if you think about it. And also the flavor, the taste, the nutrition is all maintained within the stem cell and the meat. We don't have to do any manipulations. Also, we don't do any genetic manipulations, no GM, no GMO. It's as natural to the DNA level, biologically, chemically, it's the same as shrimp meat, but it's just not come from a dead, dirty animal. It tastes the same, like I mentioned. And also, it takes us lesser time to grow. We don't grow the entire animal, and we only grow the meat inside it, which is what we eat. So that means zero food wastage as well for us. So we intend to have the product in the market by 2022. So just another 2 years in the waiting. Not too bad, but we are in the midst of, scaling up the technology and getting regulatory approval, making sure the food is safe and secure for everybody to consume. And we'll sell it in premium restaurants to start off with, and then eventually in supermarkets in the next couple of years. We're thankful to be getting a lot of grants and awards from the government. Of course, Singapore's food story and the mandate of 30 by 30, where Singapore government has announced that they want to increase local food production to 30% in the next 10 years by 2030. I think it's very commendable that the government has come up with this, and Shiok Meats falls right into the story and the mandate. So we're happy that we could get support from them and so on. With regards to funding, we did raise a couple of million. It is a capital intensive industry. It does take a while for us to do the R&D and get to a point where we can comfortably say we can, grow thousands of kilograms of meat per month, sorry. So we're in the midst of doing that. And currently we're also raising around to kind of take it further. So with that, I think I'll end and I'll take more questions. But just one thing, I think, even if all of us think about this every time we eat, think about where your food has come from, how it's made, where it's made. I think we'll make conscious decisions on what we are eating and what we are buying. So with that, I'd just like to say that let's get the world to eat clean, and you can contact me on LinkedIn or Twitter. Thank you very much. So I can see one question is, what are the main challenges you face to scale up production? I think that's a very valid and good question. So it is a challenge. So one thing is, it is a new technology. So it is something that we're learning every day and every second that we're working on the technology. But at the same time, similar technologies have been used to make fermented products like yogurt and cheese and dairy products in the past. So we learn a lot from that industry. Further questions are also, these technologies are also used to make vaccines and drugs in the healthcare industry. So we learn a lot again from there. So one big challenge, I think, for us is it is food. And at the end of the day, it has to taste right. And it has to, be acceptable by all the consumers, and the price has to be right. For vaccines, drugs, and chemicals, we end up paying a lot of premium pricing, and we don't really question it. But for food, we can't expect all consumers to, spend hundreds of thousands of dollars every day to eat meat and seafood. So we have to find a way to make sure that the technology is affordable. So a lot of collaboration, partnership is required. Working with food companies to reduce the pricing is required. So that's one thing that we're working on in terms of scale up.
We also have a few more questions
Yes.
inside the Q&A segment. There are a few of them inside. Yeah.
Okay, one is cell-based meat considered as processed meat? To an extent, yes. Depends what you think or what you call is processed. For me, processed is anything that is not naturally found in the earth, like that you can't pluck from a plant or so on. So yes, it is processed to an extent, but at the same time, it is processed to an extent where it's kept as natural as it can be without adding any chemical additives or harmful ingredients to make it look, taste, feel better. So it will come under the processed food, but it also comes under novel foods, but we want to keep it as clean as possible. Next,
we also have another, I can read out the questions for you, no worries. Yeah, so we have one question from Sharma in the Q&A. Thanks for your story and making us understand about clean meat. My question is, what media you use to grow the clean meat?
Okay, I think he's a scientist, so that's the question. So I can explain what's media, first of all, to people who don't know what it is. So as I mentioned, the cells have to grow in a nutrient-rich environment. So we actually feed the cells or give the cells a nutrient soup of sorts, like a liquid that has a mix of proteins, carbohydrates, vitamins, and so on, very similar to what the animal would eat in the surroundings. So we actually use a plant-based, or we are working towards using a completely plant-based edible food grade media. And this liquid solution is called media, so hence the word. But we want to keep it completely animal free, completely chemical free, and keep it as natural. Yeah.
Okay, we have this question. I believe is actually a two-part from Mithi in the Q&A. What is the most important value in your company apart from quality and taste?
Yeah, so the most important value for us, like I mentioned, is health, animal, and environment. So we kind of tick all the boxes that's required for clean, healthy food. So health is where we don't use antibiotics, chemicals, hormones. So it's clean that way. Animal friendly because we don't kill animals in the larger scale, which is unfortunate and unethical. And the third is that we're environment friendly because we use much lesser land, energy, and water when compared to conventional way of growing seafood and meats.
Okay, thank you. We have one from K. Sushma. What advice and tips would you give for budding students in undergraduation who have immense interest in research? Can we do our MSc in foreign countries? Tell us from your experience, ma'am.
Sure, thanks. I think I wouldn't say advice, but my suggestion would be that you definitely, I think it's better that you do a master's or a PhD. I think undergrad is great. I mean, it's the basis of education, the education that you can get. But depends what you want to do. So if you want to get into a very advanced field like cell-based meats or drug or therapy or healthcare, doing a master's is very helpful. If you can further do, then a PhD is great as well. You can get your doctorate degree. But I've seen many undergraduate students successfully get a very good career, start up companies on their own. And I think your question was, can we do it in a foreign country? So it depends. For me, I did my undergrad and master's in India. I didn't choose to go to the US or UK, for example, and that didn't really hold me back from doing what I've been doing. So it depends what you want to do in the future. Feel free to reach out to me individually if you need more help. Yeah.
Okay, I also detect a pattern. We have two questions that are around the same from the chat and Q&A. The question is, question number one is, with regards to the chemicals that were used to grow meat in labs, does this cause any health issues? And also, is it safe for people with allergies to consume, the lab-grown meat?
Sure. So in terms of the chemicals that we use, like I mentioned, we don't want to use chemicals. So what we want to use is plant extracts. So it's like, for example, I'll just give you an example. So shrimps in the ocean feed on algae and seaweed and other plants. So what we do is we take the extracts of those plants and we use that to grow our cells. So we want to stay away from chemicals as much as possible. And even if we do use chemicals, it will be at such lower limits that the food regulatory authorities already approve of. Very less quantities such that it will not affect your health. So that's how we want to keep it clean. The next is the question about allergies. We always get this. So like I mentioned, our meats are exactly the same thing as you would eat from a dead animal, but except that our meats don't come from a dead animal. So to the DNA, protein, nutrition level, it is still the same. So that means, yes, if you're allergic to shrimp, you will still be allergic to our product, unfortunately. But again, there are two types of allergies in crustacean or shellfish allergies. One is where about 20% of the population is allergic to the shell and 80% of the population is allergic to the meat itself. So if you're allergic to the meat, you cannot eat our meats because it's the same thing. But if you're allergic to the shell, you might be able to eat our meats, but there's further studies to be done. So don't take my word for it. But theoretically, you should be able to eat our meat because we don't grow the shell and there's no shell component to it. So you shouldn't have any allergic reactions. But we are going to do further testing to confirm that before we can confidently say that, yes, you can go try it. Yeah.
Oh, that's fascinating. I mean, I didn't even know there's a difference between the shell and the meat. So let's move on to the next question. Yes. One question from Chitra in the chat. How easy is it to produce other types of meat using this technology? Maybe poultry, red meat? Could be the
Sure.
question.
So we are about 40 companies around the world, mostly situated in Europe and US, that are predominantly working on red and white meat. So chicken, duck, pork, beef, and so on. And then there are about 5 companies around the world working on seafood, which Shiok Meats is one of them, but we're the only ones currently doing crustaceans. But the other companies are working on tuna, salmon, other types of fish. So yes, the technology can be widely used for any animal that has stem cells, and every animal has stem cells. But the technicalities of the technology are a bit different between each animal. So you have to be really skilled enough to be able to get the stem cells, take the stem cells out of the animal and make them grow outside of the animal's body for many, many, many generations, because you don't want to keep going back to the animal to get stem cells, because that again kind of is animal cruelty, right? Why would you go back to the animal again and again? So you want to have a very good stem cell source and be able to grow it continuously so that you don't have to go back to the animal ever again.
All right, thank you. We have one question from Miss Merrill in the Q&A. She mentions, ethically, Shiok Meats is a great initiative, but what if people are health conscious and turned vegan for that purpose? The cholesterol in prawns are still present. Is the cholesterol in prawns still present in Shiok Meats? And what about microplastics? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Yes, so we aren't trying to convert vegan and vegetarians to become meat eaters or seafood eaters. Honestly, this product is more for people who don't want to become vegan and vegetarian. We are trying to cater to the omnivore, meat eating, seafood eating population. But to answer your question, there is no cholesterol because we actually don't grow the fat or the cholesterol part. And this doesn't play a part in the taste or the flavor of the product. And another thing is, once you deshell a shrimp or a prawn, the fat layer or the cholesterol actually goes away with the shell. And what's left behind is only muscle and protein. So we grow only that part. Next, microplastics. No, there is no question of microplastics at all, because we don't grow the entire animal. We don't grow them inside water. The water and the nutrients that we feed the cells are of the purest food grade quality. So there's no microplastics.
Oh, that's really good news. I guess, lovers of dim sum in the future can definitely look forward to Shiok Food for that. All right. The next question we have is from Miss Grace Fu in the Q&A. Hi, Dr. Sandhya. Thank you for sharing your entrepreneurial journey. I have 2 questions for you. Firstly, why was shrimp chosen over poultry? Second, were you able to modify your product such that even folks with seafood allergies consume? So I guess her second question was answered previously by you already, so we could focus on her first question there.
Sure. Yeah, so for us, being in Asia, we wanted to work on a protein that is most consumed here. So the most consumed meat or, protein in Asia is actually seafood compared to red and white meat. So it's kind of seafood first, white meat second, red meat third. And among seafood, the most consumed is actually shrimp, because we use shrimp in every possible product in Asia. It's used as a paste, it's used as a powder, it's used in flavoring, it's used as a base for like noodles and rice dishes. Even a simple cup noodles packet, even though it is not having any chicken in it, it will say shrimp flavor was used or shrimp paste was used. It's simple things like that. And it's a huge industry. Like I mentioned, it's a $25 billion industry. So for us as a business, the first need was, why go after an animal like shrimp? Like I mentioned, huge problems with the industry, the dirty shrimp that's being used, the antibiotics, the slave laborers, animal cruelty. The second reason was, as a business, it needed to make sense. We needed to go after a huge market. So it is a successful business for our investors and the team in the future. So, and the third thing was, nobody was working on shrimp. So that meant we could be the first and kind of the unique company that works on crustaceans and be a leader in that technology. And we kind of are doing that currently. Yeah.
All right. The next question, I think, is a bit of subjectivity. Have you tasted the clean meat produced in your own lab? If yes, how is the taste compared with real shrimps?
Okay, I'm going to be very honest. Like I mentioned, I've been a vegetarian all my life. So the first time I tasted shrimp is when I started Shiok Meats. And the second time that was normal shrimp that you get in the market. And the second time or the second and the third and the fourth time that I tasted it is the shrimp that we made. I felt it tasted the same, but don't take my word for it. So we, of course, had proper omnivores and advisors and chefs and food tasters taste it for us. And all of them said that they couldn't tell the difference between conventional shrimp in a dumpling and our dumplings with shrimp. My co-founder Kai, of course, eats seafood and meat, and she also said there's no difference. They can still get the sweetness of the shrimp, the moistness that you expect, that seafood umami flavor. And one thing I can definitely say is the minute we open the dish or like the steamer, you can immediately get the smell of the sea, the smell of the seafood. And so take their word for it. But I will just say that we're very happy that it tastes the same. And we're hoping to, further the texture and the flavor as well as we, work more on the R&D. Yeah.
That's wonderful for us foodies to know as well. The next question, very scientific this time, coming from Ms. Sivakuma in the Q&A. What type of coating media do you use for cell anchorage, and how many days does it take for you to get a final product?
Okay, this is going to be a little hard for me to talk in simple English, so I'll just answer it in scientific language. Our cells are in suspension, and so we don't use any coating, and we don't have to do cell anchorage because when we grow them in the bioreactors, they have to be floating, so our cells are floating. The second thing is how many days? It takes 4 to 6 weeks. So the 4 to 6 weeks is constant. And it can be 1 kilogram or it can be 1,000 kilogram. It's just the size of the production facility that we have and the equipment that we have, but it takes 4 to 6 weeks. Yeah.
All right. So we also have a couple of questions inside the chat. I do understand, ladies and gentlemen, we have about 5 minutes left in the program. So one of them is, what's the possibility for a mid-career switch you would advise? I think not much elaboration there, but I would assume maybe the person asking, Mithi, perhaps you would like to elaborate a little bit more. Is it towards the food industry, like what the doctor is in? The next question perhaps is, besides shrimp, will there be fish in the future? Maybe for Shiok Meats.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, at this point, we are concentrating on crustaceans. So we want to kind of master the technology and produce shrimp, crab, lobster, and crayfish. Even among those 4 animals, there's so many different species. If you take shrimp, there's Pacific whitehead, there's tiger, there's red cherry shrimp, there's kuruma and all of that. In crab, you have mud crab and, different types of, Alaskan crab and so on. So that is going to take us a while to actually look at which products we want to work on. And yes, we might look into fish, but there are other companies doing that. So I hope that they come out into the market soon enough so that we can all enjoy it.
Oh, yes, we do have the elaboration for the question on the mid-career switch. So what's the possibility for a mid-career switch completely different from, scientific backgrounds, into something you're working in?
Sure. I've seen many people do that. So I've seen that. I think you just have to confidently go try. And if you need to get upskilled, like you want to learn something, go for a workshop. There are enough online workshops and classes and even online degrees that can help you do that. Honestly, for me, I'll tell you, I have had a mid-career switch from a science to a non-scientific background. Even though I run a science company, I don't do any science now. I talk science, but I don't enter the lab. I don't do any lab work. I do business, I do finance, I do fundraising, I do consumer education. I do, running a team, running a company, so employee management and so on. So it's definitely a huge mid-career switch for me, but I guess, you just learn along the way and always be humble and modest. And I'm not the best, I always say I'm not the best boss, but I'm learning along the way. And I will get to a point where I will be appreciated for being a CEO of a company and helping people kind of grow in their career and life as well. Yeah.
Okay, I think we have just time just for the final 2 questions. One is, what tests will be needed to get the product approved for mass consumption? And the last question is, if you're using are you using stem cells alone to grow meat, or differentiating them into different cells as existing in the shrimp body?
Sure. So I'll take the second question first. So that's again a bit more scientific. So yes, when we eat meat, we actually don't just eat stem cells, we actually eat the tissue. So the stem cells get converted into muscle tissue or muscle fibers. And yes, to answer the question, we grow the stem cells and then differentiate them into actual muscle tissue and muscle fibers. that exist in the shrimp body. That's when you get the flavor and the texture, otherwise you won't. The first is what tests will need to be done. So every test that's required in terms of normal seafood and meat, so everything from, food safety, pathogens, bacterial, viral, fungal diseases, also the nutrition content, the way that it's made, whether it's GM or non-GM. So these are some of the tests that the different government and regulatory bodies will require us to do. And we'll do all of that on a regular basis to make sure that the product is safe for human consumption. Yeah.